Are you able to stream? Do you just stream straight from Discord for the cameras?
Yeah, I'm just streaming Discord. Yeah, I'm straight up just
Cool.
streaming Discord. Yeah, very very scuffed, very casual.
Yeah, I
Um,
was thinking like if we had talked about this sooner, I would have figured out how to stream since I've only done that like 2 or 3 times ever.
yeah, it's yeah, all right. We're live
Yeah, you're
now.
pushing.
Yeah, we're pushing. Okay, so this is welcome everyone. This is going to be a very I'd say casual kind of discussion with Paris and myself. Just two different perspectives looking at Milsim as a whole, and then kind of getting into specific games and maybe problems if time allows. And this is not going to be necessarily a podcast, I would say, but maybe more of an interactive, like very much an interactive discussion with chat, as well as you having your questions answered if you have any. But yeah, we're gonna jump straight into it. So like, there's been a lot of discussion recently, of course, sparked up by the ICO, or the squad infantry combat overhaul, which is trying to attempt an extremely difficult task.
Yeah, there's been a lot of
Mhm.
misalignment in the community, you could say.
Yeah, there's been two arguments on either side of the discussion. I think at the end of the day, most people are wanting the same things, and that's kind of what this discussion is going to be about, is kind of defining what reality means, because reality means something different to everyone. It means something different to you, means something different to like the gamer that just gets home and has no idea what Milsim is. We're going to try to at least define what our definitions are, kind of explain the differences from your perspective, my perspective, maybe even chat gets in here a little bit. And yeah, that's kind of the general discussion, is defining some of these terms, at least from our perspective, and hoping to create a better framework for the discussion, because I think a lot of these discussions just get started and there's just realism, or that's realistic, or this is Milsim, or that's tactical, and none of these words, unless we can all agree on a meaning or a definition, or at least understand what the other person's definition of the word is, all these discussions get lost in the void. Because some people think something's realistic, other people disagree, and we're just using these words and we're not actually communicating because the definitions are not matching. But yeah, gonna do a little bit of that framework.
We have like an hour to define reality.
Yeah, exactly. Hopefully, educate not only some of the viewers, or even some of the people who are curious, but also just from my perspective. I know you and I have a lot of dialogue regarding what is real, what is authentic,
Sure.
what makes sense in a game world, but probably help to disseminate some of that information, whatever is reasonable to the masses as well. And then, like I mentioned before, problem solve, whether it's in these specific games or more specifically squad. All right, so we got the intent out of the way. We got kind of the scope out of the way. Let's talk about qualifications. I'll kind of let you go first, because yours are much cooler than mine, and I think you add some credibility to this discussion.
Yeah, sure. I'm an elite pro gamer. I started gaming during prepubescence. Played Counter-Strike 1.6, Day of Defeat back when it was a Half-Life mod. Operation Flashpoint, Arma. Basically, as long as I have had access to technology, I have enjoyed tactical shooters in whatever form that was at the time. Sometimes that took the shape of more Milsim style experiences. Oftentimes that was just accessible tactical shooters that you could jump in and out of and enjoy. On the professional side, and that's kind of the weird one, and puts me in this awkward position now to express that I'm qualified in some way, which feels strange. And I think most folks, hopefully from your community, certainly from mine, know at least a little bit about my background. But 11 years of service in the Army as an officer, in the infantry, led 3 platoons, commanded 2 companies, deployed 5 times, served 5 or 6 years in the 75th Ranger Regiment, including as a strike force platoon leader and a commander, and did all the schools and stuff associated with all that. So RASP, Ranger School, Airborne School, Jumpmaster School, etc.
Mm-hmm.
So unique take. I think everyone's experience in the military is different. I spent a lot of time overseas. I did not have a lot of kinetic combat experience that folks just a few years older than me had. Certainly, saw combat and found myself in plenty of tight spots and close calls, and had that whole experience, but didn't experience like the sustained gun battles that were common earlier in the GWAT. A lot of direct action oriented stuff, often not terminating in a gunfight, but terminating in a capture or something else altogether. So pretty varied military experience. Happy to discuss, what I can in some of that here. But I also don't think that makes me necessarily like the end all be all authority
Yeah,
on
most
how you design a video game. So
oh, most
while
definitely.
that gives me like some perspective, certainly, I enter discussions on game design and gaming first as a gamer, frankly, and then if some of my experience as a professional can enhance my understanding as a gamer, then so be it. But I don't think that just because I've done some stuff professionally that makes me like a god tier game designer. That's not the case. And then outside of professional service, avid firearms enthusiast, I shoot quite a bit. 1,000+ rounds a month is what I aim for. I don't often hit that. Certainly a couple hundred rounds a month. Pistol, rifle, carbine, and recently long range stuff. So
yeah, I think a pretty extensive background, and I think like you mentioned, while you're not maybe the end all be all of the discussion, I think you're definitely at least someone that's credible. I think a lot of people online are able to type comments anonymously, or they'll say they have a certain background. But I think you and I know that, even your experience in the military can be quite nuanced as far as your exposure to certain things and your experience regarding certain topics. I think that, for one, what I really like about anytime we have a discussion, you and I, is you have this extensive military background, but also you have an extensive gaming background, because I know that those two can often clash. And very like in the discussion that's popping up recently, like there's a major discussion of what is realistic and how can we implement it into a game. I think you have a very unique balanced perspective on what is actually possible and maybe how to achieve those goals. I know that I do want to give a small shout out here as well to Justin Red, also one of those types, is very extensive military background as well as a huge tactical gamer. So, small shout out to him. But I think that helps to maybe that background kind of helps create some more credibility to this discussion. So it's not just me or Moydog or Drewski or all these gamers who create content just saying, oh, this is realistic, this is how it's done, it's whatnot. It's a little bit more coming from at least some form of authority. Okay, so as far as myself, everyone here kind of should know who I am to a degree. I'm Karmakut. I kind of made a whole bunch of years of my adult life dedicated to creating the most, I guess, immersive tactical experiences. It started with Squad and led to Squad Ops, which is the One Life Squad based community that still does events to this day. Those boys are running it all by themselves at this point. It also led to me developing the Squad Dynamic Direction Overhaul mod. This mod aimed to essentially achieve a lot of the goals for ICO. So it's a very interesting discussion we're seeing, just how I'm a run and gunner. It's a very interesting development. But a lot of the design choices that we made within Dynamic Direction were built towards creating a more realistic environment. Of course, with I talked to you so many years ago regarding getting feedback for how we can kind of create that environment. Suppression being one of them. I think Virus reached out as well, saying a lot of the influence for, or at least reference for, the current suppression system that I think everyone who played the ICO enjoys came from DD. So some pretty cool, awesome some pretty cool stuff. Was really cool to hear that. But also creating COG, and you know COG very thoroughly from your own participation in the inception of the unit and helping grow probably one of the most authentic Ranger units, and would not be possible without people like you, like Savage, Grim, and then Justin as well. So it's been a pleasure to work with you on a lot of these topics, and that's kind of where I think our experience in that dialogue. I think you do have probably one of the best takes for all of Milsim gaming, coming from that balanced experience background.
Appreciate you saying it, man. And it's been crazy just over the last year to watch COG become what it is. it's too easy for me to just like talk you through extremely basic, what I consider to be basic, common knowledge, entry level stuff on the Army side to make it authentic. And you guys have taken that and just like taken it to the next level. So it's been awesome seeing how devoted that community is, and frankly, like the content that's coming out of it, the high quality edits, how cinematic it is, the way that you're able to showcase multiple perspectives, and the teamwork, and the radio comms, and the planning, and the execution, and all the contingencies that come into it. Um, it was awesome. It's been awesome just seeing that to come together, and it is not at all like running gunning in Call of Duty.
Awesome. I appreciate that. I appreciate that. But yeah, that's kind of the qualifications, kind of where we're coming from. Experienced cringe lord over here, and then experienced, infantryman on the other side of things. But okay, so now that we've got the qualifications kind of out of the way, I think the next step is to, like I mentioned before, kind of define some of these terms, at least from our perspective. We're not saying that this is the end all be all of the definition of these words that we're using, but within the context of this conversation, when we say these words, I think it helped to know what exactly we mean. So I guess the first word I have for you is the big one. What does realism in the gaming sense kind of mean for you? What do you look for that when you see that word realism or you play a game, that word comes to mind?
Yeah. And I know you want like the definition, and I'm going to do my best not to like split hairs or like do the it depends thing. I'm like very much trying to come up with a definition. Realism in gaming is when you can conduct business as you would in the real world and produce similar outcomes in a game. So in the sense of a tactical shooter, realism in my mind, sure, you can interpret it to mean weapon models and animations and fidelity and resolution and all the features that go into making a game feel like Arma, right? But realism in my mind is if I am able to react to contact in the same way that doctrine tells me to, in the same way that experience tells me to, and act in the game as you would in a real circumstance and produce the same outcome, it's attained realism or authenticity. So I think I look at much more of it's an outcomes based phenomena rather than a coding or software product. It's not a feature, it's an outcome, I should say.
I think I would agree with pretty much most of what you said. I think a lot of people kind of get distracted, and we see this comment a lot, like realism can very easily mean, as you mentioned, the pixels on your screen, how a game looks. It's why some people think Arma is the most realistic game in the world, and some will look at it and say this looks terrible. And that's I think most people would agree with that kind of I say most people, but the comments I've seen recently have been very strange. I would agree that realism to me as well means doing or being able to execute the actual action as properly or as it would be done in real life, as within the confines of whatever we're doing. I think that for me, it also encompasses a little bit of everything, and this part of goes to like, I think for me, realism has to hit a minimum level across all boards of like the visual, the sound, the models, as well as the execution. So I think my definition, and this is a great example of like having different definitions, my definition is probably a little bit more all-encompassing than just the outcomes, I'd say. But yeah, so now that we both kind of know what we both mean when we speak realism, because I know some people it's like, oh, the guns, it's not realistic because the guns look terrible. Or it's Roblox, and some people think Roblox Milsim is like the most realistic thing.
Sure.
Yeah,
and I think that's like where we end up at, like the evolution of this conversation is then like what are the game design decisions that can produce it. And I don't think that there's like a checklist or like a rule book that you have to run down to attain realism. I think developers will approach it from different directions using different solutions. But ultimately, like you just measure the output and you look at the player experience when you're done. And if it's whatever your litmus test is, and like I kind of just defined mine as pick your scenario, react to contact, knock out a bunker, enter and clear a trench, react to a sniper, react to near ambush, whatever the case may be. If you're able to do those things in the model, the game, as you would in real life and produce the right outcome, and achieve some level of similar, like, psychological state in the process,
Mm-hmm.
some fraction of it, then yeah, you're probably on the right track. And
Yeah.
I agree with you in the sense that to create a product that is marketable, there is benchmarks in graphical fidelity and whatnot that also must be achieved. Um, you can categorize those in realism. I would categorize them as just like product requirements, or
Mm-hmm.
you're a minimally viable product or a vertical slice or whatever the case may be. But I think that's all fair.
Gotcha. Okay. The next word we'll kind of define is also another big one that can have 1,000 different meanings, is Milsim. What makes something a Milsim to you? Like, is it? I know it's kind of related to realism in some senses, but what are some Milsim style features, or what kind of creates that experience?
So, and I've said this before, I don't like the term Milsim, because to
Mm-hmm.
me it has a negative connotation, not because of the LARP or the cringe. It has a negative connotation because, like, I've seen Milsim units, groups, organizations, games, communities
Mm-hmm.
choose the like worst possible aspects of service and simulate them for fun. Like if we're backslash saluting and standing in formation, and doing like accountability formations or police call, like pick the most mundane, asinine, like just unfun part of service.
Mm-hmm.
So like that's where I have issues with it. But what is Milsim in my mind? It is reenacting either reenacting a military organization in a time, place, or action that is authentic, or it is doing some sort of world building in the context of a military structure, and allowing that structure to help tell the story.
Mm-hmm.
So in that sense, it is LARP, and there is, and I don't have like a negative feeling. I say that word tongue in cheek, but to an extent, like it certainly is that, and it has aspects of it in it. As far as
Mm-hmm.
like a software or a game for it to be considered a Milsim, I don't think you can make a game that is a Milsim. I think you can make a game that encourages Milsim behaviors. Arma
Mm-hmm.
certainly does that. It provides you with the command structures and tables of organization and equipment to perform Milsim. But Milsim is a behavior that people have. It's not a behavior that a software has.
Mm-hmm. Okay. I think so. I guess one of the follow-up questions I have to that is like, where did that kind of conception of like where did that idea of Milsim originate from? Is there a particular unit or experience that you think of the original Milsim, or where you base that kind of definition off of? I'm just curious.
I mean, for me, it's smaller games. We're talking like 5-10 years ago,
Mm-hmm.
jumping in and out of, like, dude, I know like little social games. Like, this is going to date me significantly to the point where no one listening right now will know what I'm talking about. Coca-Cola, the brand, released a video game that was an RPG where it was basically Sims. This was in, I don't know, 2005.
I think I know what you're talking about.
And I remember like one summer as like a middle schooler, or I guess it would have been a high schooler, buying cases of Coke to get the bottle cap codes to go into my stupid freaking Sims Coke world and buy stuff. And I remember in that world encountering people that all agreed to wear green and call each other sir. I won't confess to like aligning myself with those nerds, but it was there, right? So like when I think Milsim, I think of that, not necessarily like that negative connotation,
But that
I very much
experience.
think of it as a group of people. That can
Okay.
happen anywhere. We see Roblox people Milsim. We
Mm-hmm.
see, high, like the highest level of it is absolutely COG, and it's done like in a very entertaining, mature, and professional way.
Mm-hmm.
But we see it at all levels. But I very much see it as like a collection of people and behaviors.
Gotcha. Yeah, because I have a slightly different, or I guess maybe even more different kind of definition of Milsim. And I think the term Milsim has definitely evolved over the years. Because I remember catching flack. This is how I kind of feel how much time has changed and how certain definitions have changed as well. Is I remember catching flack for calling Squad a Milsim. But nowadays, I'm surprised. Like coming back after a year, like nowadays, everybody thinks Squad is like a like 100% a Milsim. And I'm not sure if it was just the development of that word over the years with other, the genre of those military style shooters kind of exploding with, whether it's, see, I even dare to say like Tarkov is maybe not, but in my brain, it falls into that category. I'm not sure if it's because the definition changed over time, as well as Hell Let Loose. Hell Let Loose is also now known as a Milsim. Like that word has changed dramatically over the years. It's actually really surprising, because I used to catch a ton of shit for considering Squad Milsim, but now when I go and look at these features and I read the comments and I see the feedback, the community has changed. And that's kind of like one of the points I mentioned in the video is like the community has dramatically changed from what Squad was, 5 years ago ish. It used to be a much more competitive community, but now we'll get into it later. But it's just changed. It's very interesting. Milsim to me is pretty much utilizing a military style structure in order to execute certain military style tactics. I think that is the most it's a very broad definition. Once again, neither your nor my definition is like the end all be all. But that's those. When I say Milsim, I think military style structure executing military style tactics. That is kind of my definition. But now that we kind of understand what we're talking about, the last buzzword that I know even slips into the gun world is tactical. What makes something tactical? What is tactics?
I just default to the Army's definition of tactics, which requires 2 or more units comprising a force moving in relation to one another to achieve an outcome. That the word tactics and tactical is misconstrued constantly, similar to Milsim. And like my theory on Squad becoming a quote unquote Milsim over the last year is that I think tactical shooters writ large have grown in popularity. And they're just bringing in a ton of people, and there's a lot of people playing tactical shooters that want to be, doing some level of Milsim, but may not have the community to do it. And so the definition creeps, and it creeps closer to what they're doing, which is totally fine. I love that they're considering themselves Milsimmers. That's great. But yeah, tactics and that is what tactics are. I mean, it's maneuvering units in relation to one another to gain an advantage over the enemy and produce a reliable outcome.
Okay.
So with that definition, like one person is not capable of performing tactics. That person is capable of, performing, tasks and procedures and, TTPs, but that person inherently is not capable of performing tactics. Tactical, it's just like, I don't know, dude. Tactical, like on the internet now, just means like wearing a plate carrier and nods and like knowing how to reload an M4, I think.
Okay. No, I think that's completely fine. Some of these words have been so blown up that I think they no longer mean something accurate enough that we can use them to properly describe things. And I think regarding tactics, I would agree as well. When I think tactics, I think using multiple elements or multiple things to achieve a single goal. Awesome. Okay, cool. So we've got the terminology out of the way, just because I know over the course of this discussion, we're probably going to be using some of these words repeatedly. Okay, so the impossible task of making a game realistic, right? Or creating realism in a game. There, at the top of my head, there are a couple games that try to achieve this, and at the end of the day, I don't think any game is able to encompass all aspects of the realism that we desire. I think every game has to make some sacrifices because reality is just impossible to contain into a video game. Some games do it better than others, and some games do certain aspects much stronger than other experiences. I guess we'll start with 2, Arma and Squad, and I guess we'll kind of approach. This is where we'll start digging, or I'll start asking some questions as far as from your background, which one executes better, or like how that execution even works, because I know a lot of the times suppression being a big one. Suppression and its effects on a human and what actually happens and what is actually going on, and tactically how to utilize suppression, right? Because a lot of people on the Squad forums or on certain comment sections will say, oh, I'm suppressing this guy, but there's no maneuvering element, there's no there's no actual anything going on. They're essentially just shooting at something. Suppression, I guess from your background, what is the effects that it should have in your mind from your background on an individual or even an element?
Sure. I mean, the purpose of suppression is to fix an adversary in place to maneuver on him or
Mm-hmm.
affect him in some other way. So it's a way of shaping the battlefield, is how it would be described doctrinally. And I will attempt not to riddle this conversation with jargon that needs to be defined as we talk about it. Um, but yeah, suppression. The purpose of suppression is to put sufficient effects on a target as to prevent them from acting, thus preventing them from moving, preventing them from acting, so that you can then decide what to do with them.
Mm-hmm.
That might be break contact and run away. It might be a frontal assault in the infantry, sense. It might be to maneuver an element to their flank. It might be to bypass them. It might be to fix them in place long enough to get an asset overhead that can deliver a munition. When an adversary is suppressed, they are not, necessarily incapable of reacting. It just means that the choice to react comes at a much higher consequence and risk to themselves.
Mm.
So, an adversary that is suppressed may very well still engage. An adversary that is suppressed may very well attempt to maneuver, but those things come at a higher cost and a higher risk. And so, no amount of suppression is ever going to negate the force. But in in doctrine, we talk about achieving sufficient suppression as to fix the enemy for long enough to get an assault element in position. So you want to keep that enemy sufficiently suppressed until the very last possible moment, and at that point in which your fires would become hazardous to your maneuver unit, at that last possible moment is when suppression shifts directly off the enemy, to another target reference point or what have you. So the goal is to maintain that effect for as long as possible and then transition the fight to a maneuver element that is in a better position to finish the fight.
Mm-hmm. I think even as you're explaining it, my definition of Milsim is kind of developing, right? Like as you speak. So like the way from your explanation, it kind of like even ties some things in my mind closer together. Like suppression is used in I guess you could say a tactical sense where you must be working with another element to either break contact, squad attack, platoon attack, etc. Right? I think one of the things that also makes Milsim or Milsim or realism in my sense, and maybe in your sense as well, is communication and teamwork. Right? I think those, if anything else, might be integral in my opinion, to the Milsim experience, is being able to work with one another, because without being able to work with one another, you cannot realistically, as we defined earlier, or in a Milsim world, execute those tasks. So I just had that light bulb go off. It was kind of interesting as you were explaining it. Okay, cool. There's a lot of I guess preconception as far as how certain individuals react when under fire. I think a lot of it is born from movies. I think a lot of it is born from seeing snippets here and there in someone's combat footage. I guess in the professional sense, I know you're gonna hate this, but I guess what is a reasonable course of action, and we'll kind of just play through the whole kind of scenario, kind of step by step, because I think a lot of people, we just look at the guns, we look at the suppression effects coming in, and then that's it. That's Milsim. I think, like we discussed earlier, Milsim is those tactics, working with one another and executing the task realistically, so that we can have that realistic experience. It's not necessarily effects. It's the outcome of working together and executing those tasks. What is the general course of action? I'm just gonna have you explain react to contact.
Okay. Let's do it.
Yeah, if you could teach the gaming world in gamer worlds and not, or in gaming words and not in military jargon, what is like a react to contact situation? How does that kind of go down?
Yeah. So react to contact is probably the first thing that any infantryman learns when he goes to the field for the first time in basic training, and it is simply how to react. There's multiple types of contact. We're not going to go into all of them. I'll describe direct contact, meaning direct fire contact. If a squad, and we'll do it at the squad level because it's simple, if a squad on the move receives fire, the actions within react to contact are a battle drill. And I think that's kind of actually important to mention. A battle drill without going into like the full-on military definition, is the execution of a series of tasks rapidly without the application of a deliberate planning process, meaning everyone in that organization knows exactly what to do given a certain stimulus without having to talk about it. It just happens. React to contact is one of those things. So given a squad moving over whatever terrain in a typical military formation, when they receive direct fire, that squad is going to immediately attempt to do three things. One, return fire in an attempt to gain fire superiority. Two, move to cover. Three, call out the distance, direction, and description of the people shooting at them if they have it. So if I'm the point man in a squad, moving a squad call and fire team wedge, and I take fire, I said squad call and fire team wedge, a typical military formation, and I take fire, I am going to attempt to observe where that came from. I'm going to seek cover. I'm going to engage that threat to gain fire superiority, and I'm going to announce to the people around me, I have one enemy at 1 o'clock for 150 meters. And then once that happens, and the squad as a whole is going to move into it's going to deploy into a fighting formation. They're moving in two fire teams that are in a column with one fire team in front, one fire team in the rear, typically. At least that lead fire team is going to attempt to get online so that every member of that fire team can effectively engage the threat. And then they're going to do that to gain fire superiority, to fix that enemy unit in place, and then give the squad leader on the ground a chance to make a decision. That squad leader is going to decide to either break contact, meaning just bound away from the threat and get out of direct fire contact. That squad leader could also decide to conduct a frontal assault if they have a sufficient force ratio. And they think they have overwhelming odds and firepower and can take a frontal assault. They'll just get both fire teams online and then bound through it. Or they may decide to maneuver against that threat, which means maintain fire superiority, maintain suppression, take a chunk of your force, and then maneuver on that enemy's flank to finally destroy them once you have them in, that L shape we often talk about.
Mm-hmm. As far as in a gaming sense, executing, react to contact, what experience do you think offers the best, and I guess why? Because I think the distinction that's made between the comparison of the two, or I say two because I kind of know it's either Arma or Squad at this point, really.
Sure.
The distinction between the two kind of highlights the importance, or what is actually important when creating a realistic experience to actually execute react to contact realistically.
At the squad level, I think Arma gives you a better playground to execute doctrine as intended.
Mm-hmm.
I think Squad gives you a better playground to execute doctrine with the associated contingencies that would arise on a real battlefield.
Mm-hmm. I actually agree with you. I think Arma is a great place to set up that sandbox and kind of, I guess, there's pros and cons, right? Arma is a great, I think you can use it, I don't want to say training tool because that's cringe, but it's a tool where you can set every condition exactly how you want it. And so you can very precisely get the exact result that you want. Yeah. In Squad, you have a little bit more of the unknown because there's that human aspect. However, there's that sacrifice that it is a competitive player versus player game, and you have unrealistic kind of influences on the execution.
Player behavior is just
is
bizarre.
I think what's interesting about the difference between the two is that both to some degree end up being realistic, but both are also equally unrealistic for other reasons.
Sure.
I think when we look at Squad in particular, previously before ICO, you would have extremely fluid gunplay mechanics that would allow players to just, as the common term these days is, Call of Duty people. And so you wouldn't be able to execute these battle drills because you would easily be mopped up. I think, from a personal opinion, ICO playtest number 2 with the reduction in speed for aim down sight, as well as the addition of suppression, even though some people think it's marginal, I personally think that it provides one of the best ways to execute a fluid react to contact drill. I think the problem, and we're going to get into another kind of reaching into your background knowledge here, another kind of I guess example of people thinking how fast things happen, how that might differ in real life versus video games, is when they see it happen in real time in squad. Some people might believe or say that it is run and gun, right? Or might believe that the speed at which it happens is too fast, and it is unbelievable, and it is then Call of Duty. I know you and I have both seen, and this gets into a whole different argument of like skill level or training that certain individuals have. You know, from your basic conventional infantryman to your soft infantryman to your CAG. I'm sure we've all seen the CAG video where the guy's sprinting towards the house, crack shots, and it's like they're literally looks like airsoft clearing through the building. There's different styles of clearance, and I think different speeds at which they can be executed for different skill levels. What is a reasonable speed that you would see it being executed within a game like Squad? Do you think Squad is too fast? Do you think Squad is unrealistic in how fast some people can clear through certain contact? Because I don't want to say react to contact, because there are very few groups out there that actually do any kind of deliberate react to contact. But I'm sure you've LARPed it a little bit, and I've recently in ICO PT2 have been able to completely utilize react to contact. What do you think about that kind of experience in Squad? Do you think a lot of people think it's too fast at that engagement range?
Well, I think it is as fast as the range dictates. Because movement in Squad is still relatively punishing. And if you're in an engagement beyond 100 meters, like even if you make an instant decision and are with a team that's well rehearsed, it just takes time to maneuver. And I think like that's a fair representation. And the one thing that like inevitably we'll end up talking about is like in real life, you can die. and so that inhibits rapid action oftentimes, contingent on the operation. And the other thing is a lot of folks experience over the last 20 years, particularly in Afghanistan, saw direct fire engagements occurring at 300 to 500 meters across mountaintops, where maneuver was extremely restricted, and oftentimes didn't take place. And like oftentimes the outcomes of those engagements is, exchanging fire until the enemy breaks contact or until you have AWT show up on station to finish it. So it just depends. And Squad obviously doesn't do well like with that style of simulation. It's just different. Nor do I think it should, because I don't think that would be a very compelling gameplay experience. I'm generally satisfied with the pace of the game as it felt in playtest 2. It did feel faster, obviously, than playtest 1. There's still plenty of like work to be done with gunplay or whatever, but overall, I think it is fair. If run and gun tactics occur in Squad, it is because someone failed to pull security or establish a proper hasty defense or a perimeter defense, or like whatever, like insert jargon. They got caught. So if you're in Squad, because the weapons are so lethal and effective at range, if you're able to close to a distance where like run and gun is effective, it's because you've been outmaneuvered. And I think that is rewarding a play style that is authentic in, to some degree.
Yeah, completely, we need to probably define run and gun, because I know that kind of has a couple definitions as well. So maybe we'll get back to that. But I think one of the Maximus actually in chat. Maximus is a great old friend from the old Squad days. Makes a fantastic point, and I completely agree. One of the things that I think when people think about the pacing in Squad and the pacing in the real world, and they say realism, I think one of the things from my experience with Milsim and from my experience hosting events and all these one life experiences and whatnot, and trying to make things as realistic as possible.
Sure.
The major thing, and we even changed some of this for dynamic direction, which was removing map markers, is that unknowing, that fog of war. You don't know if there's civilians, you don't know where there's blue for, and that contributes not only does range contribute to like the speed at which you can maneuver, but identifying the target and knowing where friendly forces are, or knowing what is actually in the area. I think that is partly one of the major things that I think people, when they see elements in contact in the real world, whether they're going back from like old Afghanistan footage or whatnot, it's that fog of war. It's not necessarily that I think. Or yeah, let me phrase this a different way. What is your opinion on this? On what I'm saying here? I believe that one of the things that is causing those elements to slow down is not necessarily, oh, we're getting shot at, we're suppressed, and we can't move. It's more of, we don't know what's out there, we don't know what's happening, we don't know where everyone is, and that kind of contributes to the slower style of gameplay. But that is incredibly difficult to emulate within a PvP environment, and so that's where I think I get a little tripped up when people start saying that suppression is supposed to lock you down and you're not supposed to do anything, because I think that is something that easily, from watching certain footage or from just seeing things, that you can kind of draw that connection of like, I'm getting shot at, so we're just going to sit here. When in reality, it's as you said, elements will move or a decision will be made the second that you have all the information available to make that decision. And it just so happens that in squad, players are able to make that decision much faster than in the real world, because you have a mini map. You know, there are only 50 players on the other team. You know, there's no civilians. You've memorized the backyard of this one section of the map, and so you can execute maneuvers much faster. I don't know if slowing down the game just to slow down the game for the sake of realism, I think, to me, is where I kind of get disconnected. And like I mentioned at the beginning, this whole discussion is seeped and drowned in nuance, as far as all these tiny factors that I think contribute to what actually happens either in game or on the battlefield.
No, I think that is fair. And like, you speak to like memorizing a specific backyard. Until procedural generation becomes the norm in this genre, you're not going to be able to avoid map knowledge, even on like the giant maps in squad. Like, people are just so familiar with the layers and like the perfect meta, hab locations, that it's gamified deliberately. That's like that's a part of the design choices that I don't think that you'll ever be able to get away with. Real world fog of war, certainly real. And one of the reasons, to be honest with you, that I suck at squad is because I have my map up too much. Because I'm like extremely sensitive to like adjacent friendly units and like what's going on in the bigger picture, because that's just like how I've been programmed for a long time. And I would say that certainly fog of war slows down the pace of decision making in complex environments. I've seen like strikes take an extremely long time to get approved, because we needed to account for all of the right people in the right locations, and assure that there wasn't going to be a risk of collateral damage or fracture side, because that like chaos just induces a fog that is very difficult to cope with, and you don't take those unnecessary risks when there's actual lives on the line, and it's damn near impossible. Like, I don't know of a way beyond like a one life event to simulate that in a game that would produce player decisions that replicate real life. So long as there's the option to respawn and get back in, players will behave in reckless ways with without regard to oftentimes what's going on around them or where their friendlies are at.
And this goes back to the beginning of the discussion, where it's I don't think it's easy, and I think we both agree it's near impossible for a video game to replicate all these things in order to create a, as we defined earlier, realistic environment. So this is, I think, where you and I are in agreement again, as far as heavy-handed features that don't necessarily make sense to force these experiences, in the eyes of what you and I kind of understand, don't feel good, because they aren't necessarily the factors which actually cause that slowage or those tasks to be executed. Like suppression in squad, or extending the time to kill because the gun is swaying all over the place. They're attempting to extend the firefights in order to make sure that you can maneuver, but by implementing such a heavy-handed feature, you're getting the result at the detriment to an entire other experience. I don't know if that was exactly clear. But that's I guess in my opinion, that's why it feels bad, is because you aren't actually adding in the features or making changes to actually create that gameplay in a believable way. You are removing the agency from the player to force that outcome, if that makes sense.
Yeah. And I think like, and obviously I'm a gamer, I'm not a game designer. But when I think about squad from a game design perspective, I think like what what is the dopamine hit in squad?
Hmm.
Like what's the ideal player experience? And in my mind, it's like it's that perfect scenario where teamwork and communication produces a positive outcome, either at a small tactical level in a gunfight or at the map level, like you win the round.
Hmm.
Maybe that's like the squad leader running a logi with a homie to a super aggressive tac hab, and getting it built just in time for that like flag to become available to capture, getting all the homies spawned in on it at the same time, establishing a semblance of a support by fire, maneuvering aggressively, and then following in an artillery strike to take a point. Like that tactical action that is just seamless
Hmm.
and extremely satisfying. And if that's the dopamine hit in squad, like victory in those little small circumstances, from a game design perspective, how do you produce those more often?
Hmm. Yeah.
Should be like that should be like the problem statement. And then the to be devil's advocate, the other question you have to ask in line with that is, does scarcity of that, like if we look at a variable reward structure, does scarcity of that experience add value to it?
Hmm.
So do we either, from a game design perspective, try to give the player that often, or do we make it scarce so that when it does happen, it is more valuable, as a player experience? And then I would allow my answers to those questions to steer my design
Hmm.
choices in the way that I built the game, if that makes sense.
No, I completely. I think we're on the same page as far as that goes. I think the main thing to me when I think in the first video when I mentioned wanting a more elegant, design is one that doesn't come at cost to. I think when we talk about dopamine hit, I think one of the dopamine hits is in a first person shooter game, you have decent first person shooter mechanics. I think
That is fair.
yeah, I
That
don't
is
know
fair.
if that's like a hot take. Apparently that's like apparently it's a really controversial
Yeah,
controversial take to have like your
that's fair.
first person shooter feel good when you are shooting.
Yeah.
I think that if we I do that, and that was the main kind of caution I had to OWI is I don't know if that is the right way to go about it. I think whether it's removing more information from the map or figuring out all these other ways, these within the realm of realism that slows down gameplay rather than grabbing the player and saying you will slow down, creating the environment for that to naturally occur. And this is something that like I've had some experience with dynamic direction, whether it's removing the map markers. So now players, as they wander the map, you don't know where the other friendly elements are. You have to PID. I think that's one of the things that slows things down. Whether we add in, more in the case of Arma, like civilian targets sometimes or whatever it is. And Ready or Not, even Ready or Not, if it did not have civilians, players would clear through the map. But I think adding civilians in is an elegant design that then slows players down rather than grabbing the gun and Ready or Not and saying you cannot shoot while after moving.
Yeah.
I think those are the kind of solutions that I'm looking at game studios, whether it's Ron or Arma or Arma is not really because modders will fix it, but Squad, I'm looking at these games that
Yeah.
to push it further, a futuristic or a more modern solution rather than just decrease the values on this.
Yeah.
It's hard. I think it's very difficult. But I think a lot of the players that played Squad from when it started to now have been playing with the same kind of shooting mechanics. I do think it is fast. I do think that PT2 is probably the best balance of it all. But I don't know if the majority of people who buy a first-person shooter are going to enjoy that experience or that agency taken away from them in such a heavy-handed way that OWI has chose to. So aside from Squad, let's maybe we can come up with some solutions here as far as what are some ways that you think realistically we can slow down the gameplay aside from literally grabbing the player and slowing them down.
Yeah. The what I would say about the squad thing is like you make the point, and I will answer your question, I promise, but I just feel inclined to respond. The question of like in an FPS, should my shooting be enjoyable? The obvious answer to that is yes, but I do think players look for different experiences, right?
Sure. Mm-hmm.
And there's always going to be the player that wants it to be an extremely punishing marksmanship experience. But in the end, you're still operating a keyboard and mouse.
Mm-hmm.
Like you're not operating a firearm. Um, and so it's got to be just so damn hard to figure out how to make the keyboard mouse combo replicate actually operating a firearm. And it's super easy for me to like make a 20-minute YouTube video about how I'm dissatisfied with the god knows how many man hours went into making that build, you know?
Mm-hmm.
But it's got to be just so hard to try and get it right. Um, I I'm okay with them making it harder to shoot. I am.
Mm-hmm.
Playtest 2, it felt fine.
I
I
agree.
would be okay. I would be okay with it being harder to shoot than it was in Playtest 2. I'm not gonna freaking jump on like the sight misalignment crap right now, but I'm okay with like brutal sway.
Mm-hmm.
I'm okay with stamina crushing your ability to aim accurately.
Mm-hmm.
Like I was at the range with my buddy last weekend and we did a standing 100-yard shot static fresh, right?
Mm-hmm.
And it was taking us 5-ish seconds probably with unmagnified optics
Mm-hmm.
to engage a 10-inch piece of steel at 100 yards standing static fresh. So like that, it's not easy to do that. I think it's fair to punish the player with sway and whatnot. The question that you kind of leaned on here was like slowing the player down, specifically like the stamina stuff. 6 days in Fallujah, for example, you move very slow,
Mm-hmm.
but I feel like it's okay. One, it's not a PvP experience. Two, the scale is much smaller, and moving slowly doesn't feel like a bad player experience. It's not particularly punishing. It's not unfun, right?
Mm-hmm.
When I played squad last weekend during playtest 2, and like my hab gets rolled and I'm like at that fine line between do I just redeploy or do I walk? And then if I just like hold shift and run, I'm spending like literally 10, 7, 10, 12 minutes moving.
Mm-hmm.
That's just not, it's not a good player experience. As far as like other creative ways to slow down the gameplay, I think like the stuff that I called out is you can't do like an artificial buff to time to kill. I think that's like game breaking.
Mm-hmm.
I think there is a potential decision to model ballistic protection to some degree. I think that you can make sway more difficult to cope with. I talked a little bit about picture-in-picture optics. It doesn't pertain too much to what we're discussing right now, but and then I unfortunately I think like the big solutions are like they're bigger than changing the player controller.
Mm-hmm.
It's like map design.
No,
And
I completely agree with you
vehicle
on this point.
rework
I
and
completely agree with you on
gameplay
this
loop,
point.
like,
Yeah.
and that's the hard part. Like an infantry overhaul doesn't fix that.
Mm-hmm.
It makes the game better, sure. It does definitely make the game more fun, but it doesn't fix like the big problems.
I've talked at length with a whole bunch of my squad guys as well in this regard. I think and going back to that real world thing, right? Like what makes shooting hard real world? And I know that you and I have had this discussion as well, is like when you're rested and you're ready, it's easy. Even if you see him at a certain distance, when you're prepared for it, it can be rather easy. I think the difficulty comes in when not necessarily with the sway, because I know you have a lot of experience as well. Like we're talking real world, like stress shooting, and
Sure.
shooting in austere environments or after moving many distances. But the difficulty comes in finding the person, right? Is the first part is simply finding the individual, and then also video games are just it's incredibly hard to replicate, at least in the current games that are offered. When you go outside and you look in the real world, it is very hard to pick something out at 200 meters ish. Right, it is very in a video game, you can pick that person up. I think the problem that games have and the difficult decision they have to make is, I think coming from a first person shooter perspective, is I see the target, I'm ready to engage the target, I pull the gun up, I'm ready to left click, but the control is taken away from me. I think that is the most difficult thing. I think in a perfect scenario, if I could create this environment in my head, it is more so I'm getting shot at, I don't know where, and I must spend the time to locate what is happening or make a decision. I think that is a more elegant way to handle it. I don't know if it is possible in squad, but something about like the FPS player in me just feels like if I see the player and I'm rested and I'm ready, I should be able to fire on that player without the game yoinking the gun out of my hand and having no control and it being floaty. I think I agree with you as far as like the low stamina stuff, like low stamina, all that stuff. I'm generally fine with. The thing that triggered the ever-loving god out of me was the the cheek weld, the absence of a cheek weld, because I think coming from a having shotguns in real world or having handled them, that is one of the things that when we talk about realism or the immersion of the player, that's one of the things that I experience it, and it just yoinks me right out, because it's like, this does not happen, period, ever, full stop. It's difficult. I'm not sure how they fix the problem in squad. I mean, I don't want to go back to PT1. I know that for a fact. I think a lot of players who play FPS, they don't want to go back to no cheek weld. I think if they keep the cheek weld in, it's much easier to deal with because you can move the mouse around. But I also think that we're having an incredibly nuanced discussion regarding the cheek weld. It's incredibly hard to illustrate how important that is when it comes to sight alignment, stability, and even recoil. Like that one thing, people I've been getting comments about, like, oh, it's just a bug. it's just a video placement of where the rifle is. It affects everything. It affects the entire handling of the weapon. So I think I would be fine with PT2 if they just up the sway and maybe up the recoil. So long as I have control over the mouse, I'm happy and fine with it. It's a difficult problem to attack, but I feel like, and I very strongly feel this way, that going back and when I say like regressing to like PR style mechanics, it does feel like a regression. It doesn't feel like a new elegant solution. It feels like, let's go back 10 years and implement this hard, strict feature to straight up force you to do this. And after I don't know how many years of playing squad, it just doesn't seem right. I think there's better ways to do it. I'd have to probably think about it a little bit more. And I think you and I are also in agreement that suppression in and of itself does a solid job of kind of creating the environment that we so desire anyways, right? And I think, I don't know, speaking anecdotally, my experience in playtest 2, I was able to execute like LARPing battle drills in a live PvP environment. And that is something that I've never been able to do in vanilla squad ever before. I think this is just how my experience playing all these games. I know a lot of people think it's run and gunny. I think as we mentioned before, I think a lot of those decisions just come because you have that information, you know what decision you have to make, and you can execute it. The second I have fire superiority or you have fire superiority, you're in the position to execute it. I think one of the things that maybe players need to get used to, or players will learn, is just fighting for that fire superiority. I think that's one of the things that's kind of maybe it's just player adaptation that needs to take place in order for PT2 to feel good, where players actually, they don't give up angles and they're firing back under stress to fix each other. Because right now I think it's very easy for a squad of players or even a small group of players to still run the map, and I don't necessarily think punishing those players for making the right decisions is the right way to go. Because otherwise, I think the alternative, like the path that we go on now, is everything gets so hard featured that you are not able to utilize any skill, whether it comes to movement or the decisions made on the field. I don't know. That's just kind of how I feel, but yeah.
Like wherever it lands, the game is nerfing individual player skill as an FPS player. Like they're nerfing that outright. So be it. But you can't nerf skill altogether. And if what's remaining is the ability to fire and maneuver, like awesome. Like I applaud that. And if that's the skill that they want to allow players to exhibit that during playing the game to win, I think that's a very admirable outcome that they're going for. And I agree that I really like the way that they did suppression, even like playtest 1 suppression. And I know, like, based off what you were posting about devs talking, there was potentially some placebo in playtest 2. Like there wasn't actually too much of a suppression reduction. But I was fine with suppression in both. I thought playtest 1 suppression was fine. the big challenge with the suppression implementation is like the reason suppression works in real life is because people don't like dying.
Mm-hmm.
You can't give gamers that feeling. But the reason you suppress in real life is to be able to affect the enemy, right?
Mm-hmm.
So instead of trying to make the player feel like they're dying,
Mm-hmm.
you just need to make the player debuffed, like legitimately debuffed and
Mm-hmm.
less effective, so that you can affect them in other ways, so you can maneuver against them. And I think like the blur feature is a really it's a novel and an effective and like an objectively good way of doing that.
Mm-hmm.
Superior in my mind to like the vignettes we so often see in damn near every other game. So I think it's a great way to do it.
Awesome. No, I like the suppression is like I love it. It's my baby. I love it. Okay. Let's see. I mean, we touched on a lot of things tonight. We really did. I guess what if you had to create a realistic firefight experience, very specifically squad on squad experience, what is the timings that you would see that happening? What are the engagement ranges you would prefer that to happen at? What is, like, in your opinion, because we're talking enjoyment at this point, what is that scenario look like, and how can we maybe achieve that?
Like real world, what that looks like?
Well, if you had to take your real world background and you took it into a video game and you could replicate, like, this feels right to me. I guess that's the way I'd say it, is like, this feels right. What are the conditions that would need to be set in order for you to feel that?
Yeah, I mean, the problem is you wouldn't. I don't think you'd want it as would be desired in real world, because real world with a squad, assuming it's not running guns attached and like its mass casualty producing weapon is a 249, you want to initiate engagements at the max effective range of your weapon system. So you're looking at an engagement starting with a 249 on bipod at like 600 meters. Which is not, desirable from a game design perspective, because no one wants to run their happy ass as a player controller 600 meters to like go maneuver. I think like 150, 200 meters is fine. I think most squad engagements in squad honestly occur at ranges that feel fun and also authentic enough, as to be enjoyable and still like retain some realism. The pacing, I think, is the biggest challenge. Real world units maneuvering, unless they are already, like, I would say your decision speed and your actions become faster the closer you are to the threat, because your decision rate must be faster the closer you are to the threat. So like in a CQB environment, decisions are happening extremely fast, and you're seeing buildings get taken, rooms and floors and buildings getting cleared very rapidly. At range, where you have reaction time and decision space, those decisions are happening slower.
So perhaps I feel like perhaps you've even stumbled upon a solution of some sort in regards to run and gun, right? I think a lot of players feel like squad is very run and gunny because those engagements are happening extremely close. And as you mentioned, right, in CQB environments are less than 50 meters. You less space means less time to make a decision, and I think that is probably contributing to some of this. What players feel is a run and gun playstyle is because the engagement ranges of squad, at least in a lot of these urban environments, are so close. It 100% it must be fast, as far as the reaction from the other player. So maybe pushing those engagement ranges further out somehow. I'm not sure how they do it, because I think squad definitely feels like the majority of the time you were engaging definitely within like 200 meters, all of the engagements. And I think that probably is the biggest factor in like speed of engagement, as well as like, oh, we get time to make our tactical decision versus a CQB. Whereas games like Arma, you can pretty often see engagements out to like 600 meters from like an SBF or whatnot. It's hard to say. I think one thing, like, based on our definition of realism, is I don't think squad can achieve the realism that I think you and I want with the current. I don't know. This is a very, very tricky. We're gonna upset a lot of people, right? Because the way that the environment is set does not allow for realism, or realism as some people think it is, to occur because of the situations that you find yourself in game. I think that's the first step is setting the environment for the player. I think the problem is much further back than the gunplay or the
I agree.
suppression. So it'll be interesting to see how squad attacks it, or if they attack it from that angle. I think that'll be, as mentioned, a more elegant solution. It's a more difficult one. It is. I do not envy OWI in their position at all,
No.
and they have to maintain that balance between first-person shooter that everyone at this point who's been playing has experience for like a sufficient amount of years, as well as the tactical aspect of gameplay and the decisions that they make. They have to just tread that line lest they upset a significant amount of people, and there's valid discussions on either side right now.
There's no way they don't upset a significant amount of
I don't
people.
think there is.
Like, this is the most contentious playtest that I have ever observed. It's been wild. I mean, I'm glad people are passionate about it. I do think that wherever they land on infantry overhaul, what I saw from playtest 1 and playtest 2 is whatever infantry overhaul gets implemented, squad will be a better game for it. And you may not just agree with this, but I preferred playtest 1 over vanilla squad.
No, I
preferred
still
playtest 2 over
prefer, yeah.
playtest 1. And so, like, they're clearly moving in the right direction. Does that mean squad becomes like the perfect game overnight? No, but it becomes a game that I'm going to be going back to more often. Like, it's one that gets back in the rotation for sure. It's definitely one where, like, I want to get my friends together and, like, form a squad and go play and actually coordinate. And I think that's the goal of, like, what they're going for. It's to bring, people like me who played squad for a long time ago and haven't played in quite a bit, to get us to, consider coming back based off of the changes that they're making. And I'm 100% doing that.
I would agree to an extent. I still stand on PT1's stock weld. This is like cheek weld. It's just it's rough. It's rough. I know we didn't get into stress shooting too much or how gunplay works real world versus in game. I think we both understand, and even though people think I just shit on squad, I think even in my critique of PT1, I said it's going in the right direction, and I love the direction that they're going. I mean, it's the discussion is blown up pretty significantly at this point. I think they're going in the right direction. They just gotta make a couple changes. I hope to God they don't go back to the gunplay from PT1. Or at least just give me the cheek weld. That's all I ask. That is literally all I ask, and I can cope with the amount of sway and recoil that you give me. I think it'll be interesting to see. I think this discussion has hopefully built the framework for some people to understand a little bit more the nuance when certain terms get thrown out, as far as realism or Milsim. I know we didn't get to run and gun, but yeah, I think the difficulty right now within the community is a lot of players are it's just tribal. Some people are just going, you're a COD player, when some people are playing, you're a Milsimer, and it just completely derails the entire, or you're a running gunner, right? Just completely derails any sense of nuance in any of the critiques that are being given, because I think there's a lot we can take from either, and I think all that squad can do is achieve their vision with the least possible damage possible to their player numbers, because I think you mentioned in your video as well, I think no matter what, some people are going to be pissed. Sure. But it's been an exciting discussion. I think hopefully we can create the structure for that conversation to happen, and we've contributed. But yeah, man, I appreciate you having this conversation with me and taking the time. It's been great. Everyone here, please go sub to Pears. He's a fantastic content creator. Like, honestly, my S tier content creator, my favorite content creator.
Oh, thanks, buddy.
Yeah, man. But yeah, any other topics you got? Otherwise, like, I'll probably end up reading some chat here. I know I've been pretty absorbed in this conversation, and maybe we can. I mean, I'll stick around and kind of talk to the chat a little bit more. I won't force you into that position. But anything else you want to bring up?
No, I mean, I'd say, like, just kind of like what we started. Karma and I are heavily invested and, interested and passionate about the outcome of this update and just really the genre writ large, which is why we're talking about it and we cover it. That doesn't mean we're right necessarily. Like, we're passionate about our views, but, like, certainly willing to and open to discussing them as we are here. And I'm certainly eager to see the perspectives of others, and so are the devs.
Mhm.
So if you're just like jumping in YouTube comments and roasting us, that's fine. But a more productive use of your time is likely to, fill out the feedback form on the playtest and make sure the developers are hearing from everybody, not just those of us, hanging out on YouTube in the wee hours of the night.
Mhm. All right. Yeah. Contribute. Don't devolve into the Milsim or COD discussion, I guess. I hope this is a step forward. I know you and I both got pretty mean in the comments.
Yeah,
it's hard to resist. I won't lie. Like I personally contributed a little bit. I won't lie. It was it got a little crazy. But yeah, man. I think it's good that they're taking the time to kind of think about their implementation. I think next playtest will be quite revealing. And hopefully they land where I want them to, but we'll see. I have zero influence. Also, disclaimer: I have zero influence on the OWI decisions. I can't believe I need to say that, but some people think I'm like worm tongue Karmakut in the ears of OWI. It's insanity. But yeah, man.
Dude, good chat. Thanks for letting me come chill for a little bit.
Yeah, thanks for coming on, man. And I'll catch you around. Yeah, have a good weekend, man.
All right, buddy. I'll see you.
All right, chat. What do we got? What have you guys been up to? Yes, I have noticed how my logo looks like a stormtrooper. We'll see how long we hang around here. You have an Easter map on Goose Bay? I believe I've seen it. If it's been in the game for quite a while, I think I've seen it. What's up, Goons? How you doing, dude?